Welcome to Warhammer Faction Focus. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Chaos Army, Skaven Clan Pestilens.
Warscroll Review. Faction Focus.
Skaven Clan Pestilens are not new to the Warhammer world. They infested the Old World and now wreak havoc in the Age of Sigmar. In the General's Handbook 2017, they are bestowed allegiance abilities, and some can be fairly potent. Their battle trait grants 2 abilities. The first bit of the battle trait is a familiar Skaven rule, Strength in Numbers. The ability adds 2 to Skaven Pestilens models for every 10 models, instead of the normal 1. The second part of the battle trait is more interesting, Echoes of the Great Plague. This ability calls on one of the 5 Great Plagues. To use a Great Plague, the Skaven player must roll a natural 6 on their prayer roll. If they do, they choose one of the plagues. Each can be used once per battle, and only one can be triggered per turn. The Red Maw Plague targets the closest enemy hero within 13 inches of the priest. If the hero is within 3 inches of any friendly models in any combat phase, and not within 3 inches of an enemy model, then it must target its friends. The Skaven player takes control of the hero for that combat phase. This plague lasts the rest of the battle, so the sooner it is used, the better. Unfortunately, unless the support character has a 3-inch aura, an observant opponent will just keep their models more than 3 inches away. The Never Plague is pretty simple. It adds 1 to prayer rolls for Pestilence Priests for the rest of the battle. Remember that the Great Plagues trigger on a natural 6, so this does not affect their use. Unless the Skaven player has a perfect opportunity to use another Great Plague, this one should always be used first in order to get the most out of it. The third Great Plague is the Bubonic Blight Plague. This ability targets the nearest enemy unit within 13 inches of the priest. The unit suffers D6 mortal wounds. If this destroys the unit, the Skaven player can pick another enemy unit within 6 inches and deal D3 mortal wounds. If this destroys the unit, it continues until it fails to destroy a unit. While D6 mortal wounds is pretty brutal, D3 mortal wounds is not likely to destroy a unit, meaning this is probably not going to continue on. Really try to make sure that D6 wounds does destroy a unit though, as this is Pestilent's most powerful single ability and can only be used once per game. If triggered with Pestilent Breath, on average it will be dealing 5 or 6 mortal wounds. The Breath's origin point can be chosen in a way to deal mortal wounds in addition to the Blight Plague's chain, statistically dealing 4 mortal wounds to an additional unit if the Blight Plague can continue. Deal the Breath mortal wounds first, and the Blight Plague may just be able to kill 2 units to continue the chain. The next Great Plague is the Undulant Scourge, and it targets the closest enemy model within 13 inches. The unit suffers a mortal wound and another mortal wound for each enemy model from the same unit within 3 inches. This ability is good for dealing damage to a closely ranked unit. This ability has the downside of being easily avoided. If an opponent chains a model out to be the closest, they can easily minimize how many mortal wounds are dealt. The 5th and final Great Plague is called the Crimson Wheel Curse. This plague infects the closest enemy unit within 13 inches. It inflicts 1 mortal wound and then another mortal wound in each subsequent Skaven hero phase. Not only that, but it deals a mortal wound to enemy units within 1 inch of the infected unit. Since the enemy likely won't be that close, don't factor in that portion of the plague when choosing it. Besides the Never Plague, the Great Plagues offer extra damage. It's worth mentioning the Plague Priest's Plague Breath prayer does not need to have a target, so even if you don't have any targets in range, it can still be used. If the Skaven player does not have to worry about enemy shooting, they may want to just sit back until the breath triggers a Great Plague in order to activate the Never Plague. Many of the plagues target the closest enemy unit, so activate the Plague Priest in an order that will benefit this. Choosing the priest closest to a valuable target first is a good idea. Keep in mind that because these abilities all target the closest enemy model or unit, they can easily be countered by the opponent. On the plus side, if the Skaven player gets the double turn, they may be able to maneuver in a way to maximize the effects of the next plague. Clan Pestilens has 11 war scrolls and 6 allied factions, giving them a moderate amount of variety. The units they have are the Plague Claw, the Plague Priest, one with the Plague Censer, and one with the Warpstone Tip Staff, the Plague Furnace, Verminlord Corruptor, Plague Censer Bearers, and the Plague Monks. Within the army, there are 4 leaders, 2 behemoths, and 2 Battleline war scrolls. In addition, the faction has 4 war scroll battalions. The main leader model a Clan Pestilens player will choose is a Plague Priest. With most army builds, it will be best to take 2, 3, or even more priests. The main purpose of the priest is their Wither Prayer, which increases wound rolls against a target within 13 inches. In a Pestilence force, there is very little rend, and the hit and wound characteristics are not that great. This makes Wither a very important tool to the army. Not only will this make rolling easier, Plague Monks, an integral unit in the force, can deal a mortal wound on a 6 to wound, making this even more valuable. While Wither is often a good choice, sometimes the player will find Pestilent Breath more applicable to the situation if the Plague Monks are unlikely to deal any damage even with the to wound bonuses. The Plague Furnace is a good support piece, and the Verminlord Corruptor is actually the only source of a unique command ability. This ability is great and adds 1 to a nearby Skaven unit's attacks, but Inspiring Presence is pretty important on these little rats. While the Corruptor is tempting for the ability, Inspiring Presence is probably a bit better. While on the subject of picking your general, let's discuss command traits. Malevolent and Fanatical Leader are a bit of a snooze, as they only give the Pestilence hero a small boost in combat. Diseased offers a chance at dealing D3 mortal wounds. Neat, but the army has so many better sources, so this can be overlooked. Master of Rot and Ruin is quite a good command trait. This one would allow Plague Priest or Furnace to reroll their prayer roll. The Verminlord would also benefit in learning a Plague Prayer, getting to join in on the Wither and Great Plague fun. When a player is trying to maximize on Great Plagues, or maybe they just couldn't fit in many priests, Master of Rot and Ruin is a solid choice. Verminous Valor is an interesting trait that allows the player to pass off wounds scored on the general on a roll of 4 up, dealing a nearby Pestilence unit a mortal wound. In a shooting army, Architect of Death is a standout ability. This trait would allow friendly Pestilence units within 6 inches to reroll wound rolls of 1 in the shooting phase. When taking a couple Plague Claws or better the Foul Rain Congregation, Architect of Death will drastically increase the army's ranged effectiveness. Skaven Pestilence artifacts offer a few options to the army as well. Blastrebos, the Living Cyst, is probably the least appealing, offering a small boost in combat while having the weird rule of forcing the player to transfer the artifact to a Pestilence hero within 12 inches at the start of any hero phase. Brooding Blade and the Fumigatus both deal mortal wounds, but it's safe to say the Fumigatus is much better at doing so. Billowous Bell is an artifact that could reduce nearby enemy bravery by 1 on a roll of 4 up, pretty middling. One of the better artifacts is called Vexler's Shroud. The ability subtracts 1 from to hit rolls of shooting directed at the general. This item is great to protect a bigger general like the Furnace or Verminlord, but can also keep a priest safe. The Liber Bubonicus will also offer the player quite a bit. This artifact would allow the bearer to use the Pestilence Prayer ability. In the case of the Plague Priest, the model would be able to use 2 prayers. Like Master of Rot and Ruin, this is good for maximizing Great Plagues or making up for an army lacking Plague Priests. This is quite effective when given to an army general that is already a Master of Rot and Ruin, allowing for 2 prayers a turn that can reroll their results. Skaven Pestilens has 2 Battleline options, and they are both very inexpensive, the Plague Monks and the Plague Censer Bearers. The Plague Monks are likely to be the more common choice, but Censer Bearers still have a purpose. Censer Bearers make a good screen, and when engaging multiple units can really deal out quite a few mortal wounds. Plague Monks are where a player should be stacking any overlapping buffs. Since the army is lacking options, Plague Monks are going to be filling quite a few roles. Not only will they be serving as screens and tar pits, they will often be the player's main source of damage. With all their special rules and the Plague Priest's Wither ability, the monks can be formidable. Not that anything in the army can take a hit, but Plague Monks are astonishingly flimsy, so they will almost always need an Inspiring Presence to mitigate their losses. Don't isolate each unit too much, as even large units can be taken down quite quickly when left unsupported. Unless they have the odds quite heavily in their favor, it's likely best to not be too hasty with piling in. In this case, the Plague Monks are truly serving as a tar pit, and sticking the enemy in place while the rest of the army grabs objectives or even shoots at it. The Plague Monks have quite a few special abilities, one of which deals mortal wounds as they die, which means a large unit of monks will almost always be able to deal some damage. Coupled with the Plague Furnace's Rabid Fever Prayer, the monks could be dealing a mortal wound and attacking after being killed, making them a nice suicide unit. Be sure to stick Inspiring Presence on them to force the opponent to kill every last one of the stinky rats. The only other Pestilence unit at the army's disposal is the Plague Claw. This ranged weapon is powerful, but is only one shot, making its effectiveness quite limited by itself. Thus taking a single Plague Claw is unlikely to have much of an effect on the battle. Even 2 will struggle without any support. As far as support, the Foul Rain Congregation, Architect of Death, and Wither are all great tools. Speaking of the Foul Rain Congregation, Skaven Pestilens has access to 4 War Scroll Battalions: the Congregation of Filth, Plague Smog Congregation, Virulent Procession, and the previously mentioned Foul Rain Congregation. All the battalions are useful. The Congregation of Filth and Plague Smog Congregation increases the survivability of Plague Monks and Plague Censer Bearers respectively. The Virulent Procession deals mortal wounds and heals back a Vermin Lord Corruptor. But the easiest to appreciate is the Foul Rain Congregation. 3 Plague Claws that can add 1 to wound rolls, and reroll hit rolls providing one of the others successfully hit. On the right target, the Plague Claws can be hitting and wounding on 2s with rerolls. Pretty nasty. With this battalion, be sure to make the included Priest and Architect of Death. Clan Pestilens has access to 6 allies, all the Skaven factions and all the Nurgle demons as well. Every Pestilence model also has the Nurgle keyword, allowing the Dirty Rats to benefit from many Nurgle buffs. Also remember that Verminlords are demons, and thus the Verminlord Corruptor benefits from all Nurgle demon abilities. To start with allies, any model that takes advantage of 6s to wound is our friend. Night Runners, Rat Ogres, and Plague Drones fit the bill. Stack a few Withers on a target and have these units go at it. Night Runners can be pumping out quite a few Rend 2 attacks in larger units. Rat Ogres' 6s to wound grant them an additional attack, and Plague Drone's 6s deal mortal wounds. Stacking Wither on a single target 2 or 3 times will be drastically increasing the unit's effectiveness. A model that fits perfectly with this theme is Epidemius. The Tallyman's first enhancement, after killing 7 models, is reroll 1s to wound. After that, he increases accuracy and then saving throws, all of which are welcome in a Clan Pestilens force. In an army that focuses around the Foul Rain Congregation, or maybe just an army that needs a bit of shooting, Pestilens has quite a few viable options. Warp Fire Teams, Scryer Acolytes, and Warp Lightning Cannons to name a few. A Warlock or Arch Warlock from the Scryer faction would be a decent source of magic as well. The Arch Warlock especially, since it can cast twice and offers even more ranged mortal wound output. The Verminlord Warpseer also synergizes well with a ranged force of Clan Pestilens. The model also casts twice, but its signature spell is quite unique. The spell deals D3 mortal wounds to a unit within 26 inches. In a subsequent turn, the unit cannot run or fly and halves its charge distances. This spell can potentially slow down a threatening enemy unit. Verminlord Deceiver offers an interesting synergy as well. Along with having the ability to cast twice, the model also has a solid signature spell, Skitterleap. The spell removes a nearby Skaven hero and allows them to redeploy up to 6 inches away from an enemy. This spell can be used to teleport a Plague Furnace, Verminlord Corruptor, the Deceiver itself, but probably more interestingly, can teleport a Plague Priest to a more suitable position to use Wither. Skitterleaping with a Plague Priest equipped with the Believer Bubonicus, or even the Army General, a Master of Rotten Ruin, and the tactic will be doubly effective. As Pestilens can ally Scryer, Storm Fiends are, obviously, always a decent choice. Clan Pestilens can provide 2 things in mass: cheap bodies and mortal wounds. In general, the hordes can be used to counter the opponent's hordes, and the mortal wounds can be used on the more durable targets. Their numbers mean they can really spread out and grab a lot of objectives fairly easily. Plague Monks and Censer Bearers die in droves, and as such, it is often important to know where to pull casualties from a unit. Pulling out models in front of enemy units that have yet to activate may keep your tar pits around longer. Unless using Plague Monks offensively, always carefully choose casualties to reduce the opponent's remaining models in reach. The faction can be built as either a ranged or melee force. The ranged force is pretty straightforward: Foul Rain Congregation and hopefully some ranged allies like the Warp Lightning Cannon. In a melee force, the player will need lots and lots of Plague Monks. Well, in any case, you'll need a lot of Plague Monks. But a melee force will likely need droves to sacrifice, in addition to quite a few Plague Monks and even a Plague Furnace to bestow enough prayers to make the Plague Monks deadly. Speaking of prayers, Clan Pestilens does a lot in the hero phase. It's probably best to get markers or some way to remember all the things that are going on. Some of the hero phase activity comes in the way of once per game abilities. Plague Monks and one of the Plague Priests in particular have some noteworthy ones. This means the player really has to plan ahead as to when and where to use them. The Plague Furnace's Rabid Fever is another ability that forces the player to plan ahead. If placed on a unit likely to die in the following turn or double turn, the player can squeeze a bit more out of them before their demise. Building on the tactics mentioned previously, let's look over two army lists. The first army revolves around Plague Priests and Monks for a close combat army. As heroes, the army has 4 Plague Priests, all with Plague Sensors, Sloppity Bile Piper, and a Plague Furnace as the general. The Plague Furnace is kitted out with Master of Rotten Ruin and the Liber Bubonicus, while one of the Plague Priests will have Vexler's Shroud. Between all the priests and extra abilities, the army can be pumping out 6 prayers a turn, making the chances of triggering a Great Plague each turn quite decent. For Battleline, the army has 4 units of 40 Plague Monks and 1 unit of 5 Plague Sensor Bearers. Other than the Bile Piper, the army includes Plague Drones as allies, and to top it all off, the Plague Monks and Furnace are all in a congregation of Filth Battalion. The basic idea of this army is to use the Plague Monks to protect all the support characters, dish out damage, and hold objectives. The Plague Sensors worth extra points and can just sit back and chill. The army has a surplus of prayers and can either hit multiple targets with Wither or spam Pestilent Breath to deal out some solid mortal wound damage. The choice to Breath or Wither should be based on whether the Plague Monks are likely to do any damage to the opponent. If they are, stack Wither. If not, just hit the enemy with Pestilent Breath while the Plague Monks scream. Because of the congregation, the monks will have the chance to ignore wounds and mortal wounds on a 6, giving them a greater chance of survival. Stacking Wither on a target will also increase the Plague Drone's effectiveness. With all their bonuses to wound, they could easily be triggering their ability to deal mortal wounds on 2s or 3s instead of 6s. Keep the drones behind the Plague Monk screen until a good target comes along to hit with compounding Withers, then fly the drones in over the monks into the target. In the meantime, keep them close enough that they can make shooting attacks as well. Send those too at the Wither targets. Remember that not only does Wither enhance the Plague Drones, but the Plague Priest's Plague Tome will also. The ability would allow the drones to reroll to wound rolls against the withered target. The Sloppity Bile Piper is just there because the drones need a nearby Herald of Nurgle to activate the Mortal Wound on 6's ability, meaning this character needs to remain hidden until the drones can do their thing. The player may want to swap out a Plague Priest for another Bile Piper for the added redundancy. It won't come in handy too often, but it should be noted that the Bile Piper increases their bravery while decreasing enemy bravery. Another thing a player might want to switch out is the Master of Rotten Ruin. Verminous Valor is also pretty effective on a Plague Furnace. The other army we will look at is a ranged force based around the Foul-Rain Congregation. The army includes 2 Plague Priests, the general being equipped with the Architect of Death and Vexler's Shroud, while the other priest has a Liber Bubonicus. For Battleline, the army has 2 units of 40 Plague Monks and 20 Plague Sensor Bearers. As mentioned, the army includes the Foul-Rain Congregation, so there are 3 Plague Claws in addition to an allied Warp Lightning Cannon, 2 Warp Fire Throwers, and a Poison Wind Mortar. This army is meant to deploy as far back as possible and delay the enemy as long as possible. Plague Monks and Sensor Bearers make good screens for this. Send them up in waves and try to slow down the enemy. March the Plague Monks right in front of the enemy and let the Icon of Pestilence spill dirty rat blood all over them as the rest of the force fires everything. Sit the Warp Fire Throwers out of line of sight but nearby in hopes to get a couple shots off when the time comes. This army is really lacking in Plague Priests, and while they can still use prayers 3 times, the player will not be relying much on Wither. Luckily, the Plague Claws in the battalion already wound on 2s, and most of the other ranged weapons just deal mortal wounds. The one ranged weapon that could benefit from Wither is the Poison Wind Mortar. Stick this out of line of sight, off to the side, and fire it at large units. It won't be that effective, but they were extra points, so meh. When facing Clan Pestilens, the strategy is pretty straightforward. Kill the characters. Don't let the Plague Monks bog you down or distract you from taking out the support characters first. In a combat army, wiping out the Plague Priest will greatly reduce the army's effectiveness. This often goes doubly for the general and any characters with artifacts. After the support characters are gone, the Plague Monks and Sensor Bearers should crumble pretty quickly. When facing a ranged Pestilence force, the strategy is slightly different. try to target the Plague Claws first, and if they are in a foul rain, prioritize the Plague Priest in the battalion. Faction Focus breaks down ratings into 5 categories: offensive ability, defensive ability, board control, versatility, and synergies. Clan Pestilens is somewhat lacking in the offensive department, but they do have quite a few sources of mortal wounds to redeem them. Defensively, the Skaven are pretty decent since they can pack so many bodies on the table. While they are paper thin, they are cheap enough for it to not matter. The area Skaven Pestilens excels most in is board control. They are moderately fast, but being able to spread out due to their huge units will allow them to touch quite a bit of the board at once. Versatility is an okay point for the Pestilens. While they lack choices in units, they still have the option to focus on melee or ranged combat. In addition, they have quite a few ally options that can offer a bit to the force as well. The army's options, when it comes to synergies, leaves a bit to be desired. Having a handful of usable battalions and access to Wither benefit the Plague Monks quite a bit. But Plague Monks can't really do everything. Clan Pestilens earns a 3 out of 5. They're quite average and don't really offer anything too unique. What do you think of the Skaven Clan Pestilens? Let me know your thoughts and suggestions for War Scrolls to review in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.